What is going on YouTube? Gavin's here and welcome to the 31st episode of the Tech Pills bi-weekly live stream. Alright, let's jump right to the first news of today. HP Z-series laptops and desktops will now be certified for Ubuntu 2004 LTS. 2020 so far has been a great year for Linux hardware, and the latest announcement for new Linux hardware comes from HP and Canonical, recently announcing that the new HP Z series of computers are now certified to run the latest LTS version of Ubuntu. The computing questions are the Z Central 3R, ZBook Fury 15 G7 and 17 G7, ZBook Studio and Create G7, Z4 G4 and Z8 G. Z Centrals are their remote workstation solutions, and let me actually show you what I'm talking about for once, if I can manage to. Apparently I cannot. Damn it. Alright, let's try this anyway. I just set up a new gallery view for you to see what I'm talking about. It was a long time coming, and now here it is finally. So this is the new ZBook Fury, and this is one of their mobile workstation laptops. And really all of these PCs, all of these computers that Canonical and HP are presenting with Ubuntu support are mostly workstations. So as for the laptops, they're mostly mobile workstations, low power, well, not slow low power, but high performance and relatively low power machines. They're made to run like serious workloads, mostly made for developers with a particular focus on AI, thanks to the included Nvidia graphics cards. So we all know that most of what's AI nowadays is actually powered by CUDA or TensorFlow, and so in a certain way it needs a GPU to do all that nice compute stuff. So these particular models come with various Nvidia graphics card options up to the Quadro RTX 3000 graphics card. So very powerful GPU for compute purposes. And of course, they are certifying these laptops and these desktops for Ubuntu, as of course Linux is the go-to option if you are a developer. And we have some different models here. The Z Centrals are their remote workstation solutions. So they're basically rack-mountable, powerful PCs. The Z2s are their desktop offerings, and we'll go to that later. And finally, of course, the ZBook or the ZBook are obviously their laptop lineup. So there's pretty much everything for your needs. And I just wanted to say something on the desktop side of things. As for the laptops, of course, having more OEMs supporting Linux is a great thing. Because when I buy a laptop, when I go out and buy a laptop, I want to buy something that actually supports Linux. And that's mostly because I'm tired of having to always play around with like making the particular laptop that I'm trying to work with Linux. And of course, with years, this got kind of worse and worse. It's pretty good nowadays, considering most of the hardware is standard, but once in a while you come across that laptop that has something like, I don't know, the weird specialized hardware. I don't know, say for instance, let me wait a second, let me turn on the light here, it's a bit dark. All right, that's a little bit better, sorry for that. So once in a while you come across that particular laptop that has some weird stuff going on and it doesn't really work 100% with Linux, and that's either because of the I don't know, the webcam doesn't really work, or maybe it's the fingerprint sensor, and there's always something going on. And having like proper Linux support on laptops, I think it's the most important thing. As for desktops, of course, desktops you can build your own, and they're mostly standard. So it's really difficult that you find a particular desktop PC configuration that doesn't work with Linux. Most of the hardware does work. As far as CPUs go, you can use either Intel or AMD. And as far as graphics card go, again, Intel, AMD, or Nvidia, they all work to different extents, of course. The situation with Nvidia graphics cards on Linux is, I mean, they work, but of course, the drivers aren't great. We'll get to that later. Let's move on to the chat right now. Karan Gupta, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, asks, I'm trying to decide which distro should I use as my daily driver between Fedora and Ubuntu. I mainly do development in Java, Python, SQL, etc. So that's a nice question. So of course, for development and for most of what you may want to do with Linux or with your computer, distributions at this point, they don't really matter too much. So the first suggestion I have is go with something that supports your hardware well. And I mean, maybe I know that Ubuntu has a good support for most of the hardware out there, and Fedora is getting there, but it's still, at least to my knowledge, it's been a while since I last checked out Fedora properly. To my knowledge, Fedora could have some problems with stuff like Nvidia GPUs, or not really problems, but it's not as easy to set up compared to Ubuntu or distributions like Manjaro, whatever. So my first suggestion would be go for something that really supports your hardware well. The second suggestion, get something that you are familiar with. Of course, it's no point trying to have a work machine with Linux if you're just continuously tinkering with it. If you have to get things done, just go with something that you're familiar with. Go with something that you know your way around and you know how to use. And the third thing being, specifically for development, I love Arch for various reasons. I am not suggesting you go with Arch necessarily, because that's a whole rabbit hole on its own. And of course, it has a learning curve and you need to be playing around with it to actually be able to use it to its full potential. Maybe something like Manjaro could be an option. I don't know. I don't want to go there really. You asked between Ubuntu and Fedora. Now, I know that Fedora tends to have more up-to-date packages, so that could be an important difference for you. So if you want to develop using like the latest version of Java or Python, or I don't know, you need a particular IDE, or, well, I mean, not necessarily for IDEs, that doesn't really matter too much because you can get anything with snaps or flatpaks or whatever. But for like core packages like libraries, and particularly for Python, there are lots of libraries out there, and I usually tend to use the packages that are included in my repository instead of using pip. You of course can use pip, but at that point you could probably use a virtual env, and that doesn't matter too much. You see, it doesn't really matter too much. If you want something, it just boils down to this. Apart from desktop support, from hardware support, and apart from what you're familiar with, it all boils down to the packages that you need. If you don't particularly care for up-to-date packages, Ubuntu is probably fine. If you do care about more up-to-date packages and more, I don't want to say bleeding edge, but closer to the bleeding edge stuff, you're probably gonna want to go with Fedora. Of course, your mileage may vary. It really depends on what you're trying to do with as far as development goes with this machine. I suggest you try both, and you maybe stick with what you're familiar with already. That's probably a good idea. Anyway, I was talking about desktop PCs here. And the thing about, of course, HP has these nice offerings for their desktop PCs with Linux support and everything. But as far as desktops go, I think that it's always a better idea to build a desktop rather than to buy a pre-built one for two main reasons. One, well, more than two actually. Okay, the first reason is you get more bang for your buck. So you actually buy what you care about, and you don't have to pay for assembly, for shipping of the whole PC. And at the end of the day, you probably will get a better machine, both in terms of quality and performance, if you build your own, because you can be careful and decide exactly the kind of components that you want. Of course, that takes some you have to get into it. You have to understand how to actually go ahead and build a PC. That's not too hard. That's actually very easy, and in my opinion, it's very enjoyable. So if you are looking for a desktop PC, maybe don't go with the pre-built, maybe just build your own. And the other reason is that, of course, you learn quite a lot building a PC, and when you actually have built your own machine, it's more likely that you will be able to service it by yourself, so you won't have to spend too much time with headaches on like disassembling a pre-built and trying to swap some components like going forward or something. If you want to upgrade, or if something goes bad and you have to change a small component in your PC, say the RAM or the hard drive, it's easier with a custom built PC than it is with a pre-built, usually. So I always suggest you to go with DIY PCs if we're talking about desktops. Of course, with laptops, that's not really a choice nowadays, is it? Anyway, let's move on to the next news of today. Speaking of PCs, Nvidia just destroyed and changed the whole desktop PC ecosystem. They recently announced the RTX 3000 series of graphics cards. And they were a long time coming. There have been rumors and leaks and whatever, so we mostly already knew all about these cards. But what we didn't know was the pricing. So let's just talk about the hardware first. So Nvidia just announced their latest high-end RTX 3000 series graphics cards. They're built on the Samsung 8nm node, if you care about that, and they support PCIe Gen 4 connectivity. This is a very exciting release, and it's mostly for the price. So they've announced 3 graphics cards here on the higher end of the spectrum: the 3090, 3080, and 3070, with their MSRPs being respectively $1,500, $700, and $500. That's pretty crazy. The highlight here is actually on the lower end, in my opinion. The $500 RTX 3070 will reportedly be faster than the previous gen $1,200 2080 Ti. And that's quite impressive, at least in my opinion. That's impressive, okay? $500, buy you something that up to yesterday you were buying for $1,200. That's just crazy. This is definitely a huge leap in GPU performance, in paper at least, and will probably have a huge impact on the market. I won't go too deep into the numbers of these cards, as they are not out yet, and numbers don't really mean too much in this space. And while it's apparently very exciting, we still need to have a good look at this hardware and see what reviewers have to say about them before jumping to any conclusions about performance or about the price to performance. Everything you want to know about these cards, they've just been announced. They will be coming between September and October of this year, so they are coming very soon. And once they're in the hands of viewers, we will actually see what they're capable of. So Linux support for these cards, of course, I don't have any reason to believe that this will be any different from what Nvidia is actually currently offering on Linux. So of course, it's the usual deal of other standard technologies, proprietary bullshit. And so of course, I cannot recommend any Linux user to buy an Nvidia GPU, but of course, this doesn't detract from the fact that the hardware is objectively, at least seemingly, very powerful and very capable. I'm sure you'll be interested in these GPUs if you do any work involving CUDA. And of course, if you do any work involving AI, as we were saying previously, which of course you can mostly do, well, CUDA you can only do on NVIDIA GPUs. AI, well, it's mostly NVIDIA at this point. Let's jump right to the chat. Mauro Mazza joins the chat. Hi, Mauro. And says, I always saw Fedora as a great workstation distro. I always end up installing Ubuntu. Last time I tried Fedora was 4 years ago. Maybe it's time to give it another go. Yeah, I mean, Fedora is one of those distributions. It's kind of in a weird spot because on the one hand, it's like the staging version, if you want, of what Red Hat is doing. So if you want to know what Red Hat will look like in like 2 or 3 years, you probably want to go with Fedora. And the thing about Fedora is that they are usually the ones that introduce new technologies, new way of doing things. So they were, I think they were the first to use systemd back in the day. And now most distributions out there use systemd, and that's for a good reason. Apart from any systemd detractors out there, I think systemd was actually a very huge step forward, for Linux, both in the server space and in the desktop space. And they're now going to disrupt the market again, well, disrupt the Linux ecosystem again, going with the BTRFS file system by default for with snapshots and whatever. And of course, BTRFS is a great file system, and with all the craze that ZFS is seeing as of late, it's only logical that they want to experiment with something that's actually built to run on Linux, like BTRFS. And I mean, BTRFS does have a bad rap in the community, but it's actually a very nice file system, and the open source guys have used it for a very long time with lots of success. So I think that this move from Fedora, as every move they've made, every bold move they've been making since, well, forever, does mean something. I think that they will succeed in bringing BTRFS to higher adoption. Let's see where that goes. Karan Gupta says, got curious and I was hearing a lot of buzz around Silverblue. Okay, so about Silverblue, it's a weird distro. If you're thinking about going with that, I suggest you don't go with Silverblue for a daily driver distro. It's, at this point, it's in sort of an experimental phase. It's an experimental distro by itself. So the thing about Silverblue is that I've never tried it, but I've read a lot about it, and yeah, there's a lot of buzz around it. And you basically have like immutable system images. So every time you update your system, you install something. Well, I don't even think you can install proper packages in Silverblue. You just have like your operating system image, and that's read-only. And whenever you update, you download a whole new image, and next time you reboot, the new image replaces the old one. And of course, you can roll back and whatever. This way, in theory at least, you should have a more stable system, and you shouldn't be able to mess it up too much to the point that it doesn't work anymore. And of course, you can always roll back to a previous version if something goes south. So that's the nice thing about Silverblue, and the idea there being that you are supposed to install like most of the software you need via Flatpak. And while Flatpak is at a very nice point at this point in time, I don't think it can replace a proper package manager, not for every kind of package out there. Just think about something like a terminal. You cannot really use a terminal inside a Flatpak sandbox. There are ways around that, but that's not a great experience at this point, and it's still kind of hacky. So I'd suggest if you want to try Silverblue, go ahead, knock yourself out, but don't try it as a production distro. Try it like in a virtual machine or in a spare laptop or something, or if you have like, if you want to do a partition or whatever, but don't rely on it too much because it's very much a moving target at this point. Still very interesting, and I'm very curious to see where the Silverblue project goes in the long run. Mauro replies, as always, Nvidia put out awesome hardware, but what we want, it's the combination to the Nvidia open source driver. Now that would be really awesome. Yeah, I mean, of course, if Nvidia put more effort into their open source drivers, that'd be actually great. And let's actually have a look at this graphics card. It looks nice. We have to say it. It looks like it's powerful. All right. Anyway, what I was saying, if the driver were open source, I would have no reason to suggest going with AMD, because to be honest, Nvidia has the performance advantage as far as raw performance goes in games, and most of the time, not always, but most of the time, even in compute, Nvidia has an edge. But I cannot suggest anyone to use Nvidia at this point, because the whole experience on Linux is just trash. Wayland doesn't work because they're doing their weird implementation and the drivers are proprietary. And once they drop support for your card, you're stuck with an old driver that has some problems, will have some problems with Xorg or whatever. It's a mess. And I've tried this on my skin. Doesn't really work in the long run. Nvidia on Linux. It does work, but it's not feasible, in my opinion. It's not the best experience. Once you go with an AMD GPU, you understand how it's supposed to be done. It just works better. That's all. I've talked about it extensively previously in the channel, so I won't go too deep into that. But anyway, Mauro again says, lots of love and hate for BTRFS. Hope to see it finding its niche. It's good. It's so good, but it's so hard to compete with ZFS. That's right. I mean, I'm not one of those people that knows a lot about ZFS, to be honest. I know enough to know that it's a very nice technology. It's great. I understand it, and I understand where it does make sense. But BTRFS is no slouch either. I think Facebook, as much as I can hate Facebook as a company, I have to say, of course, their technology is good. And they use BTRFS in production, in their servers, all the time. And they've been using it for a very long time at this point. BTRFS is a good file system. If you need snapshots, if you need backups, if you need logical volume management without using LVM, of course, you can use LVM. But BTRFS does volume management as well. It's great. If you want to use it, just go ahead, try it, play around with it. It's a good idea. Gumbo says, Fedora is my go-to main easy desktop distro, but Gentoo is my love. OpenRC, ZFS, LibreSSL, also Wayland is amazing. I've never played around with Gentoo. In my, what is it, 10 years plus of Linux, I've never played around with Gentoo. I just find it too daunting, to be honest. And I just don't find the idea of compiling all my packages particularly appealing. I do compile some packages. I mean, what I download from the ADUR, of course I compile. But that's already pretty boring to sit around and wait for those packages to update. So having the old system work like that, I don't know if that's for me. Still, of course, Gentoo is a great distro. OpenRC is a great alternative to systemd, if that's your thing. I honestly prefer systemd. ZFS, go with whatever you like. I mean, ZFS is a great technology, as well as BTRFS. LibreSSL isn't something I've ever heard of. I should read more into it. Sounds like a re-implementation of SSL, but with a more free license. I don't know. I'll look into that. Also, Wayland is amazing. Wayland is amazing. And I've been using Zway quite a lot lately. And I, of course, always come back to GNOME on Xorg because I need to play games and stream and whatever. And Wayland isn't always great for that. And also, when last time I tried to share my screen in Microsoft Teams, and yes, I am forced to use Microsoft Teams lately. It's terrible. It's worse than Skype. I didn't believe I would ever say that. Microsoft managed to make something that's worse than the current Skype is. Anyway, when I tried to share my screen on Wayland with Microsoft Teams installed by a Flatpak, it just crashes. It just plain crashes and doesn't give you an error or anything. It just blows up. Whatever. I don't know. Wayland is great. It's still not there yet. It's not the fault of Wayland, but of the applications that don't work on it. Of course. Of course, that's a problem. Mauro says, finally, after dropping my Nvidia card, I managed to join the Wayland Club. Welcome. That's awesome. Given the fact that Zway doesn't support Nvidia hardware, and I don't blame at all the maintainers. Of course, having to do the weird Wayland with Nvidia thing, like the EGL streams or whatever. I don't remember. I never remember what the Wayland implementation with Nvidia is, but Anyway, yeah, it's a mess to implement, and I think that both GNOME and KDE actually implemented it, and the performance is just, it's not usable. So I don't think it's even worth like the effort. Gumbo says I use Way all day, every day. Yeah, I was there like up to 2 days ago. Uh, I went back to GNOME at some point. Sway is awesome. There are some things that I don't like about Sway, but it's because it's made to be simple and you're supposed to do other things with add-ons, but of course there aren't any add-ons for what I want to do at this point, so whatever, I don't know. Sway is awesome. It's pretty great, and I think it's probably the best window manager I tried. It's the only window manager that I stick with after I tried it for like 5 minutes, and I'm still using it from time to time these days, so that goes a long way to say how good Sway is. And particularly with like the FreeSync thing, I can use FreeSync on my main monitor without having to turn off my other monitor. That's just that sounds dumb, but I think that's just awesome. Anyway, let's move on to the next news of today. A new PinePhone has been announced. This time it's the Manjaro Community Edition. Will I get this one? Who knows? So a new PinePhone in partnership with the people behind Manjaro, the Manjaro distribution. It's really the old same PinePhone. They're offering both the standard version with 2 gigs of RAM, 16 gigs of storage, and the convergence pack that goes for $199 compared to like the $150 USD. The convergence pack comes with a more powerful PinePhone that has 3 gigs of RAM instead of 2 and 32 gigs of internal storage compared to 16. And it also comes bundled with a USB Type-C dock, so that's very handy. I think I will go with that. I think I will buy the next PinePhone, the Manjaro Community Edition. It's still not possible to buy it this time, but pre-orders should start mid-September. Honestly, I always get more and more excited about this phone with every new announcement. That's just goes. I mean, it's a toy, right? It's not like it will replace my Android phone that I hate so much to use every day, but it will open the door to a pure Linux experience on my phone. Finally, that's something I just want to try. And I'm a developer. I can try to make things better on it. I can try to develop apps that I want to use if they're missing. I don't know. I just want to try it. And the hardware is pretty bad, honestly. It's the device itself, it's very cheap. It's great the fact that it works with so many distributions and it works so well for the hardware, of course, since it's not like the bloated Android. But still, I want to try it out. I want to see what it's like to use a Linux phone in my everyday, day-to-day life. Let's see where that goes. I will probably buy this one. I cannot say 100%, but I will probably go with it this time. At the end of the day, it's just like $200. So let's see where that goes. Moving on to the next news of today. Ludo is a new minimal front end for libretro, written in Go, actually. So let's have a look at it. So this is from, I'm pretty sure this is from the guys at the same guys that developed libretro. If you don't know, libretro is an awesome compatibility layer for various old school console games with different emulator cores. If you know RetroArch is the flagship front-end and reference implementation of libretro. This is basically capable of doing the same things. You can run your emulator games, but instead of having like the clunky user interface that RetroArch has, you have a more minimal and more pleasing user interface. At this point in time, it's still a little bit quirky. I tried it out on my machine, and while it works with like a keyboard, it crashes as soon as I connect my Xbox One controller. That's weird. There are issues open on the GitHub repo for this particular problem. They've been open 3 days ago. I think we have to give it some time, give the project some time to fix these issues. It still needs a bit of polish and elbow grease here and there, but the idea is definitely very nice. And having like this kind of nice interface for your games, like for your emulator games, if you want to have like this thing running on a home theater PC, I think this is a pretty good idea. And I mean, I just love how nice the interface looks. It's very simple, but it's straightforward, and most importantly, it looks pretty good. Looks pretty good. Let's jump to the chat. I think every tinkerer drools thinking about Linux phone, and a cheap one like the Pine phone is a wet dream. Yeah, you actually got the point here. The Pine phone is a device for tinkering. It's not something that you would probably use extensively in your day-to-day life. I mean, I could do that, but of course, I would always carry my Android phone with me, even if it was turned off without a SIM card, just as a backup, you know, because at this point, the experience is not there yet. We have the hardware, the software is another story. Of course, it's difficult to have software ready when you don't have the hardware. So we have to start from something. And this is a great developer device. And I think in the long run, this is actually proving to be a better Linux phone compared to the Librem 5. And it definitely has wider adoption and a wider development around it compared to the Librem 5. So let's see where that goes. So if you want to know more about Ludo, let's just close this story here. If you want to know more about Ludo, you can go to ludo.libretro.com. Moving on to the last news of today, the ThinkPad X1 Carbon with Fedora is out. So the first ThinkPad laptop in the upcoming Fedora Linux powered lineup by Lenovo is officially out. Starting at a whopping $1,300 US. The ThinkPad X1 Carbon Gen 8 is a 14-inch Ultrabook powered by Intel 10th Gen U-series CPUs. As for the specs, all the models have some form of a 4-core 8-thread CPU, be it an i5 or an i7, with the difference being the cache sizes and the clock speeds. Either 8 or 16 gigabytes of unfortunately soldered memory and up to a 1 terabyte NVMe SSD. The screen options are 1080p with or without touch support, 1440p and 4K as well. This is of course an Ultrabook class device made more for on-the-go use with excellent battery life, and we're talking about 19 hours of advertised battery life on their website rather than doing intensive work. For that, we're still waiting for the upcoming mobile workstation type devices that have already been announced previously by Lenovo and the Fedora team, and that will come to the market, well, I think anytime at this point. There's still something to say about other Linux laptop manufacturers, starting with like more mainstream ones. We've been talking about HP. You probably already know about the Dell Sputnik project that has brought Linux laptops to Dell machines. Well, the Sputnik project has been a way for Dell to support Linux to some capacity in some specific machines. And there are also the other Linux first OEMs out there that we cannot forget, of course: System 76, Star Labs, Tuxedo, Slimbook, Entroware, and many other that I'm not remembering off the top of my head right now. But still, of course, if you want to go with something mainstream, Lenovo, HP, Dell are great options. But if you do want to support the people, the companies that have always been there supporting, giving you support to Linux hardware in the first place, I think a better option would be to go with something like System 76, Star Labs, Tuxedo, Slimbook, Entroware, and all of those other Linux first OEMs. And at the end of the day, Lenovo, Dell, and HP are massive companies. They mostly care about making a profit. These other companies, these smaller ones, they're tinkerers, they're geeks, they're Linux people. they actually do use their products with Linux in their day-to-day life. And they know what it's like to have something not working properly in your system or something that's half-baked. And they sell products in a way that you don't have to deal with that. I just want to say it's great to see mainstream OEMs supporting Linux, because in some particular circumstances, you have to go with the mainstream OEM. But if you don't really have to, give these other smaller OEMs a try. I think your experience will be great. Particularly right now, the X1 Carbon from Lenovo is like not a very powerful machine. If you want something powerful, System 76 has the Bonobo workstation that they recently released, and Tuxedo also has lots of very powerful machines, including Ryzen powered machines, and we all know how well AMD works on Linux, right? This doesn't want to be an advertisement towards these companies. It's just a way for me to show my appreciation for those companies that have always been there compared to these mainstream companies that are just jumping on the Linux bandwagon all of a sudden. Of course, it's great. Again, I don't wanna say that Lenovo or Dell or HP are not doing a good job here. They're doing something great for everyone at the end of the day. But we don't have to forget about the smaller players in the game. Let's move to the chat. Mauro says, speaking of cheap, ThinkPad. Yeah, ThinkPads are not cheap compared to the PinePhone particularly, or any other Pine 64 products. Mauro says, jokes aside, it's great to see that these major brands given Linux as an OS choice. It means that they choose their hardware based on its Linux support. Yeah, I mean, they do have at some point to sell some Linux laptops, because we've been seeing that there is a demand for these kind of machines, of course. And because developers like me, like you, and like many other out there that do stuff far more advanced than what I dream of doing in my life, they need Linux to do their job. And they probably are not even like thinkers or geeks, or they probably don't care about Linux at all, but it's just needed. It's like on servers. You cannot sell a server that doesn't support Linux, because 99% of servers out there will run Linux. So it's just that the market is shifting in a way. With these machines, of course, they're targeting developers, so it does make sense for them to ship Linux versions of them. And this, even the announcement from HP was for workstation class devices or mobile workstation devices. And this announcement from Lenovo is for their ThinkPad lineup, which of course are their professional professional lineup. Dell even they have Linux options for their XPS lineup, which is again their professional, more developer oriented lineup. There's a pattern here. They're targeting developers because these are the people that are buying these machines. It's pretty straightforward. All right, guys, I think this is going to wrap it up for today's episode. Thank you, everyone that joined me today. It's been great, and I know that I don't always get a lot of engagement in the chat. If you do have any suggestion on how to get more engagement, maybe it's the time of day I do these shows, or maybe, I don't know, it's something else. Maybe you want to have it announced like a day earlier or something. Just let me know your suggestions in the comments down below. Anyway, this is gonna wrap it up for today's episode. Thank you very much for watching, guys. If you like this video, please make sure to press the thumbs up button down there. Also, remember to subscribe to my channel if you want more of this. You can also join the TechPills community at techpills.technology/community, or using one of these QR codes on the left side of the screen. Thank you again very much for watching, guys, and I'll be seeing you in the next one.